Welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5361 Theory and Management of Public Service Organizations. These are the readings from the required text, Managing Human Behavior in Public and Nonprofit Organizations, Chapter 10.
It is good to be back in the virtual library. And, today we are tackling a subject that I think generates a more visceral, emotional reaction than almost anything else in management theory.
Oh, absolutely. We are diving into Chapter 10, working in groups and teams. And I have to be honest, as soon as I opened the PDF and saw that title, I had a physical reaction. My stomach just dropped.
Right.
You know that feeling when you're in a lecture hall or maybe even a staff meeting and the person in charge, they clap their hands and say, okay, everyone, for this next part, we're going to split into groups.
The universal dread of the group project. It's like a shared trauma for anyone who's been through the education system.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You get thrown together with like 4 random people. One person, and let's be honest, it's usually me, ends up doing 90% of the work because I'm terrified of getting a bad grade.
The contributor, we'll get to that.
Right. Another person just vanishes off the face of the earth until the night before the deadline. And then the other 2, they just sit there in this awkward silence waiting for someone to tell them what to do. It's painful.
It is painful, and it's wildly inefficient. But here's the hook for today's deep dive, and this is what the reading really gets at. That dysfunctional nightmare you just described, that's not a team.
See, that's what I want to get into, because we use the words so interchangeably. Group, team, task force, committee. But Chapter 10 argues there's a hard, almost scientific distinction.
That's the core of our discussion today. We're going to unpack why a work group is structurally different from a real team. And this isn't just, semantics, it's about performance. We're going to look at how public and nonprofit organizations can move from being just a hierarchical collection of people to becoming a really high-performing unit. We've got some heavy-hitter frameworks to cover Tuckman, Parker, Katzenbach, and we're going to end with a massive case study. The Chilean mine disaster, it really brings all the theory to life.
So let's start right there with the definitions. What is the actual fundamental difference? Because to the average person, a team just sounds like a group that, bought matching T-shirts.
It is significantly more rigorous than that. The text really leans on the seminal definition from Katzenbach and Smith, which goes all the way back to 1993.
Yeah.
They define a team as a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, specific performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable.
Okay, that last part. That feels like the heavy lifter in that sentence. Mutually accountable.
It is the absolute pivot point. Let's contrast this with a standard work group. In a typical public service agency, right, you have a work group. You have a strong, clearly focused leader, let's say a director. The accountability is individual. You have your job description, I have mine. We both report up to the director. If you do a great job and I completely fail, well, that's my problem, not really yours.
Right. So in a work group, my main incentive is just to keep my side of the street clean. I don't really care if you're struggling, as long as it doesn't, blow back on me.
Correct. The group's purpose is just the organization's mission, but sort of writ large. But in a team, the dynamic shifts, and it shifts fundamentally. You have shared leadership roles. The team produces collective work products, not just a bunch of individual papers stapled together.
Staple job. I love that.
And that mutual accountability means we are answerable to each other, not just to the hierarchy.
So if we're a team and you're struggling, I can't just stand by and watch you drown. Because if you fail, the team fails. Our fates are linked.
And that creates a very, very different psychological environment. The text quotes Dennis Kinlaw, who notes that work groups typically lack the consistency, intensity, and restless dissatisfaction you find in real teams.
Restless dissatisfaction. That's a fascinating phrase. It implies that a real team is never quite happy with the status quo. They're always kind of agitating to do it better.
Which is often rare in large bureaucracies, right?
And that's why this distinction matters so much for public service. We're trying to move from doing the job as it's defined to actually solving the problem.
Now, this shift didn't just happen overnight. The text gives us a bit of a history lesson here. It goes all the way back to the Hawthorne studies. I feel like I've heard that term a million times, but could you remind us what they actually found?
So this was way back in the 1920s and 30s. Researchers were studying workers at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Chicago. And originally, they were looking at really simple physical conditions: lighting, brakes, humidity. The idea was if they improved the lighting, productivity would go up. Right. A classic industrial era way of thinking.
Ah,
People are just machines. You just do the machine, you get more output.
exactly. But they found something really strange. Productivity went up when they improved the lighting, sure. But it also went up when they made the lighting worse. In fact, it pretty much went up no matter what they changed.
Why? What was going on?
Because the workers were forming a social group. They were being paid attention to. They developed this informal social system with its own norms and expectations that were actually more powerful than the management's rules. It was the discovery that the informal organization is what really creates the culture.
So you can't just engineer the physical environment. You have to understand and, I guess, work with the social environment.
Which leads us fast forward to the 1980s and this explosion of total quality management, or TQM, and these things called quality circles. This was heavily influenced by the rise of Japanese manufacturing.
Right.
And the idea was that the people closest to the work, the people who are actually screwing in the bolts or processing the forms, they know more about the problems than the managers do.
Which seems so obvious now, but I guess back then the whole philosophy was managers think, workers do.
Precisely. TQM completely flipped that. It used teams to solve quality problems. W. Edwards Deming, who was the guru of this whole movement, he famously said, if you work together, you should end up with something better than if you work apart. And if you don't, why bother with the team?
But implementing this in the real world is messy. The text brings up a much more modern example that I found really compelling. General Stanley McChrystal in Iraq, this is from his book, Team of Teams.
And this is such a crucial case study for the public sector because the U.S. military is the ultimate hierarchy. It's rigid, it's rank-obsessed, and it's built on command and control.
Right. And they were in Iraq fighting al-Qaeda.
And they were losing the pace of the war. McChrystal realized the problem wasn't firepower, it was structure. The U.S. military was a top-down hierarchy, so information had to go from the soldier on the ground up maybe 6 levels to a general. A decision was made, and then the orders came back down 6 levels. That can take days.
Meanwhile, al-Qaeda is a network. They're decentralized. 3 guys in a garage can decide to launch an attack, and they can do it 5 minutes later.
Exactly. It's the classic turning an aircraft carrier problem versus steering a speedboat. So McChrystal had this radical realization. He couldn't just destroy the hierarchy. I mean, he still needed generals and accountability, but he had to overlay a network of teams on top of it.
So how does that actually work, though? Do you just tell the soldiers, do whatever you want?
No, that would be chaos. He focused on 2 key things: shared consciousness and empowered execution. He broke down the information silos between the Navy SEALs, the Army Rangers, the CIA, everyone. He started holding these massive daily briefings, they call them O&I briefings, where literally thousands of people dialed in.
So instead of information being hoarded by the spies and only given to the top generals, everyone got the same intel at the same time.
Yes. And because everyone had the same context, the same consciousness, he could then push authority down to the edge. He could tell a team of SEALs, you see the target, you make the call, you don't need to ask me.
He trusted them to make the decision he would have made because they now had the same information he had.
That is the absolute key. And the text makes the point that this wasn't done to make the soldiers feel warm and fuzzy. It wasn't about empowerment as some corporate buzzword. It was a tactical necessity for survival in a complex environment.
And for our listeners in government or nonprofits, we're dealing with complex problems like homelessness or disaster relief. A rigid hierarchy is often just too slow to solve them.
It can't keep up.
So we know we need teams. But the text is really careful to point out that team isn't a one-size-fits-all label. There's actually a whole menu of team types. And I think this is helpful because a lot of frustration comes from not knowing what kind of team you're actually on.
Oh, it's essential to diagnose the type. The text outlines 6 specific categories. We should probably walk through them.
Let's run the list. So first up, top management teams.
These are the folks at the helm, the C-suite, the executive directors. In a public agency, this might be the commissioner and all their deputies. Now, the dysfunction here is usually that they act like a work group.
Right.
They show up representing their specific departments, HR, finance, operations, and they fight for their own turf.
The Game of Thrones approach to management.
Exactly. To be a real team, they have to transcend their specific departments and really own the collective vision of the whole organization. They need to be what the text calls a process improvement team for the entire system.
Okay, next up is project teams. This feels like the most common one for people, entering the workforce.
I think so, yes. These are ad hoc. They have a specific mission and, crucially, a specific shelf life. launch this new initiative, plan the annual gala, implement this new software. They often bring together cross-functional expertise, but the defining feature is that when the project is done, the team dissolves.
Which brings us to number 3, which kind of overlaps a bit. Cross-functional teams.
This is all about breaking down silos. The text gives the example of improving a hiring process, or maybe administering unemployment benefits. If you think about it, hiring touches HR, it touches finance for the budget, and it touches the actual department doing the hiring. If you try to fix that just from inside HR, you're going to fail.
Right. You can't see the whole picture.
You need a team that cuts horizontally across those vertical boundaries.
Makes sense. Okay, number 4, process improvement teams.
These are often smaller, much more focused groups. The text mentions a team in state government that was tasked with speeding up check deposits. And it sounds boring, but think about the impact. If you can move millions of dollars into the state's bank account 2 days faster, you earn more interest.
It adds up.
It does. These teams look at one specific workflow and just optimize it.
Okay, now, number 5 is the one that I think generates the most skepticism. Self-directed teams.
Ah, yes. The controversial one.
It just sounds like anarchy. If I tell a manager, hey, we're going to be self-directed now, I'm pretty sure they hear, we're going to do whatever we want and completely ignore you.
That is the myth.
Yeah.
And it's a common one. Self-directed does not mean leaderless or goalless. The distinction is all about constraints. In a true self-directed team, management still sets the what and the why. Management says, we need to process 500 applications by Friday, and here is the legal criteria you must follow.
Okay, so the destination is set. The goal is non-negotiable.
Exactly. But the team decides the how. They decide who does what task, when they take breaks, how they inspect their own work for quality. They essentially take over the direct supervisory duties.
So you're removing that middle manager who stands over your shoulder, checking your work every 5 minutes.
You are. And the research shows that when these teams really mature, they are incredibly efficient because you cut out the bottleneck of waiting for approval on every tiny little step. But, and this is a big hook, but not every employee wants this. Some people really prefer the clarity of being told exactly what to do.
All right, it's more responsibility. And finally, number 6, the one we are all living in now, virtual teams.
The modern reality, geographic dispersion, and total electronic dependence.
And the text had some pretty sobering data here. It said virtual teams often lag behind face-to-face teams, specifically in participative decision-making.
That shouldn't surprise us, really. Trust is just harder to build through a screen. In a physical office, you have what urban planners call collision density. You bump into people at the coffee machine. You chat about your weekend while the meeting is starting.
Right, that shooting the breeze.
That's what builds the social bond. That's the connective tissue.
And in a Zoom meeting, you log on at 2:00 p.m. on the dot, you do the agenda, and you log off at 2:59. There is no breeze shooting.
Which is why the text suggests that for virtual teams, you have to be intentional. You have to structure the socialization. You literally have to put social time on the agenda for the first 5 minutes of the meeting.
Which sounds excruciating. Okay, everyone, we have 50 minutes of mandatory fun. Go!
It feels artificial at first, I know, but without it, you just remain strangers. And if you're strangers, you never get to that mutual accountability we talked about. You're just a bunch of names in an email chain. You have to create the space for humanity, or the team just remains a group.
Let's pivot to that humanity aspect. Because even if you pick the right team type and you have the right goal, well, people are messy. You can't just throw 5 smart people in a room and expect magic to happen.
Not at all.
The text uses Bruce Tuckman's model of team development, which I think everyone has heard of but maybe hasn't really thought about in depth.
Tuckman's model from 1965. Forming, storming, norming, performing.
It rhymes, so it sticks. But let's break down why it actually matters. Stage 1.
Forming. This is the cocktail party phase. Everyone is incredibly polite. Everyone is on their best behavior. You're asking yourself, how do I fit in here? Is this environment safe? The team is looking to the leader for direction, for security. There's almost no conflict because, frankly, nobody cares enough yet to fight.
Right, it's all, oh, sure, whatever you think is best. And then the honeymoon ends. Stage 2. Storming.
The conflict stage. Now, most people view this as a failure. Oh, no, we're arguing. The team is broken.
Exactly. I hate conflict. If people start arguing, my first instinct is to just quit the group.
But the text argues, and this is so important, that storming is necessary. You cannot skip this stage. In this stage, members start resisting the constraints. They start to question the leader. Why are we doing it this way? I don't agree with your idea.
But why is that a good thing? It sounds terrible.
Because it means people are finally engaging. They're testing the boundaries. If you suppress the storming phase, if the leader forces everyone to be polite, you end up with what's called artificial harmony. You agree on the surface, but underneath there's just resentment and confusion. You have to have the fight to actually resolve the roles and the process.
So when you're in that group project and you're arguing about who should write the introduction, that's actually a sign of growth.
It is the fire that forges the team. You're moving from being polite strangers to being honest collaborators. But you have to survive it first.
And if you do survive it, you get to stage 3, norming.
Norming is where the team starts to create its own identity. You start hearing the word we. The rules are established, the roles are accepted. You've learned how to disagree without destroying the relationship.
And finally, the promised land. Performing.
High efficiency. The team is now self-managing. You aren't worried about the interpersonal dynamics anymore because you trust each other implicitly. You can focus 100% of your energy on the actual task. The text notes that teams at this stage can handle incredibly complex problems with high energy and very little supervision.
But to get there, you need the right mix of personalities. And this connects perfectly to Glenn Parker's work on team player styles. I love these kinds of frameworks because I immediately try to diagnose myself and everyone I know.
It's a very useful tool. Parker identifies 4 styles, and his core argument is that a high-performing team needs a diversity of all 4. You can't have a team of all one type.
Okay, let's run through them. First, we have the contributor.
The contributor is task-oriented. This is the data junkie. They do their homework. They are dependable. When you need the slide deck finished or the research summarized, you go to the contributor.
Then you have the collaborator.
This is the big picture person. They're goal-oriented. They're the ones who keep reminding the team, hey, why are we doing this again? What's the mission? They're willing to step outside their defined role to do whatever is needed to help the team win.
Third is the communicator.
This is the social glue of the team. They're process-oriented. They care about how we're treating each other. They resolve conflict. They make sure everyone is heard. They're the one who organizes the team lunch.
And finally, the one that I think often gets a bad rap, the challenger.
The challenger questions everything. They ask why. They play devil's advocate. They're the one who will disagree with the leader in a meeting. They push the team to take risks and consider alternatives.
In a bad team, the challenger is seen as the troublemaker. You know, the person who's just being difficult for the sake of it.
Yes, they can be annoying. But without a challenger, your team is incredibly prone to groupthink. You might march happily right off a cliff because everyone was too polite to say, hey, I think there's a cliff over there. The challenger forces the team to maintain rigorous honesty.
But imagine a team of only challengers.
Oh, a disaster. You would spend 6 months debating the font choice for the title slide and never actually produce anything. Just like a team of only communicators would have a wonderful time chatting and get nothing done.
You need the mix.
You need the contributor to do the work, the collaborator to keep the vision, the communicator to keep the peace, and the challenger to keep it all honest.
This mix of styles inevitably leads to friction, though. And the text has a really counterintuitive section on conflict. It references some research by Jen and Mannix regarding what they call the paradox of conflict.
This is fascinating stuff. We tend to think conflict is a flat line. It's either always good or it's always bad. But they mapped conflict over the timeline of high-performing teams. And they found a very specific curve. Low conflict at the start, moderate to high conflict in the middle, and then low conflict at the end.
Okay, explain that curve.
Yeah.
Why would we want a big fight in the middle of the project?
Well, at the start, you need alignment on the goal. If you fight about the basic mission right away, you'll never get started. But in the middle, when you're figuring out how to actually execute, you want debate. You want the challenger to speak up. You want to test different options and hash it out. That moderate conflict means you're vetting your ideas rigorously.
And then at the end, you need to lock it down and deliver.
Right. Once the decision is made, you need to align on the final output and ship it. Low conflict, everyone gets on board.
The text illustrates this need for productive conflict and trust with a story that I actually had to read twice to believe. The West Point rowing team anecdote.
Oh, the story of Colonel Stas Perchevsky. It's a great one.
So he has this rowing crew. Physically, they're specimens. Individually, they are the best rowers at the academy. But as a team, they're losing. They're completely dysfunctional. They don't trust each other at all.
They were a group, not a team. Simple as that.
And his solution, I mean, if a manager did this in a corporate office today, HR would have an absolute field day. He made them wrestle.
Literally wrestle. He paired them up and forced them to grapple with each other on these big mats.
Why? I mean, aside from the obvious potential for injury, how does wrestling help you row a boat faster?
It wasn't about the physical skill of wrestling. It was about stripping away all the posturing. The rowers had been acting arrogant, hiding their own weaknesses. When you're wrestling someone, you cannot fake it. You are physically vulnerable. You feel their strength. They feel yours. There's no hiding.
If ours is a kind of primal honesty.
Exactly. It broke down all those social barriers. After the wrestling matches, the rowers stopped seeing each other as that arrogant guy from the third seat and started respecting each other as teammates who were willing to fight. They built this foundational trust. And the result? They started winning races.
It's an extreme example, but it points directly to a concept that Google made famous in their Project Aristotle study, which is also mentioned in the text.
Yes. Google studied over 180 of their own teams to find the perfect algorithm for a high-performing team. They looked at IQ, they looked at skills, they looked at personality blends. They thought they would find some magic mix.
Like put one PhD, one extrovert, and one coder in a room and you get success.
But that wasn't it at all. The #1 predictor of team success, above everything else, was psychological safety.
Define that for us. What does that mean?
It's the shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Can I admit that I made a mistake without being mocked or punished? Can I propose a crazy idea without being silenced? Can I challenge the boss's opinion without fearing for my job?
That brings us right back to the West Point wrestlers. They felt safe enough to literally fight each other, which paradoxically made them feel safe enough to trust each other in the boat.
If you don't have psychological safety, you have what's called impression management. Everyone is just hiding their flaws and trying to look good. And if you're busy hiding your flaws, you sure aren't fixing them.
This changes how we should measure success, doesn't it? The text brings up Richard Hackman's 3 criteria for team effectiveness. And it's not just about the final output.
No, not at all. Hackman says you have to look at 3 things. First, of course, is productive output. Did you actually do the job? Did the client get what they wanted? That's the baseline.
But that's usually where we stop measuring. Did we hit the target? Yes. Okay, move on.
Right. But Hackman adds #2, process enhancement. Did the team get better at working together over time? Or did they burn so much social capital to hit that deadline that they can never work together again?
And then there's #3, personal well-being.
Did the experience contribute to the growth and well-being of the individual members? Or did it burn them out?
That is the one that really hits home for public service and nonprofits. We see so much burnout. You can have a team that gets the job done, but in the process destroys the mental health of everyone involved. Hackman would say that is a failed team.
Absolutely. There's a case study in the text about the Florida County Corrections Division. They moved to a team-based structure for their officers, but they didn't just measure inmates processed or something like that. They measured dimensions like encouraging risk-taking and interacting as equals. They institutionalized the soft skills because they realized that without the personal well-being of the officers, the entire system eventually collapses.
Speaking of systems collapsing, I think we've arrived at the centerpiece of this entire deep dive. The text dedicates a lot of space to a case study that is literally a matter of life or death. The 2010 Chilean mine disaster.
The Copiapó mining accident. This is the ultimate exam for every single concept we have discussed so far.
Let's just set the scene because the details here really matter. It's August 5, 2010. A massive block of rock, twice the weight of the Empire State Building, collapses inside the San Jose mine in Chile.
33 men are trapped. They're 2,300 feet underground. That's nearly half a mile down. They're stuck in a small refuge shelter that was designed for maybe a few days of occupancy.
And nobody on the surface even knows if they are alive or dead. For 17 days, there is no contact. They're in total darkness. It's about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 90% humidity.
And the food supply. The shelter had emergency rations for 2 men for 10 days. There were 33 men.
Just think about the psychology of that for a second. You are literally buried alive. You're starving. You have no idea if anyone is even coming for you. This is the perfect recipe for a Lord of the Flies scenario. Panic, violence, hoarding, every man for himself.
It could have so easily devolved into utter chaos, but it didn't. Instead, those 33 men formed one of the most high-performing, self-directed teams in modern history. They organized themselves to survive.
And the text breaks down exactly how they did this, and it maps so perfectly to the concepts we just talked about. Let's start with leadership.
It started with Luis Urzúa. He was the shift supervisor on duty when the collapse happened. Now, in a crisis, you often see authoritarian leadership take over. I am the boss, do exactly what I say. But Urzúa was different. He recognized that his formal authority from the mining company didn't mean much when they might all be dead in a week.
So he had to shift his style.
He became a democratic leader. He maintained the boss role to provide structure.
Yeah.
And remember, in the forming stage, people need direction to feel safe. So he organized the resources, he took inventory of the food, but he made all the big decisions by consensus.
But you can't just have operational leadership in a situation that terrifying. You need to deal with the sheer terror of it all.
That's where Mario Gomez stepped in. He was the oldest miner, 63 years old. He wasn't a boss, but he became the de facto spiritual leader. In Parker's terms, he was the ultimate communicator. He organized a daily chapel in a corner of the cave. He counseled the younger men who were breaking down. He provided the psychological safety that kept despair from consuming them.
And then you had Yanni Barrios.
The doctor. Now, Barrios was not a doctor. He had taken a basic 6-month nursing course years earlier. But in that environment, he was the medical expert. He stepped into that role completely. He monitored their health. When the drill finally broke through and they established a supply line, he was the one administering vaccines and managing the medical reports for the real doctors on the surface.
What's just incredible to me is that they built an entire society down there. They had a parliament. They had one man, one vote.
They established norms, and one of the most critical norms they all agreed on was about the food. Remember, they were starving. They were eating a spoonful of tuna every 48 hours. The temptation to steal food or eat your portion early must have been overwhelming.
But they made a rule. Nobody eats until everyone has their portion served.
That is so profound. That simple rule reinforced mutual accountability in the most visceral way possible. We eat together, or we starve together. It signaled that the group's survival was more important than any one individual's hunger.
And they maintained this discipline for 69 days.
69 days. Even when the supply line was established, the Palomas, these carrier tubes sending down food and iPods and letters, they maintained their structure. They divided the cave into work zones and sleep zones and sanitary zones. They worked shifts to keep a rhythm of day and night, even in total darkness.
They refused to let themselves become passive victims just waiting to be rescued. They kept working.
That is the self-directed team in its purest form. The what was survival. The how was entirely up to them to figure out. And the text makes a very strong point here. The technical rescue from the surface was a miracle of modern engineering. I mean, NASA was involved, drilling experts from around the world. But if the team downstairs had collapsed psychologically, if they had killed each other over food or simply died of despair, the drill would have arrived at a tomb.
Their ability to function as a team is what bought them the time to be rescued.
Precisely. It validates every single thing we discussed. Structure matters. Roles matter, norms matter, and above all, looking out for the person next to you matters.
It really puts our daily office grievances into perspective. Oh, the printer's jammed again. This team is a total disaster. Well, are you trapped under a mountain? No. Then we can probably figure this out.
It's a high bar for comparison, to be sure, but the mechanism is exactly the same. Whether you're in a mine or a municipal planning office, you need a shared purpose, you need distinct roles, and you need to trust that your teammates have your back.
So, as we begin to wrap up this deep dive, we should look at where this leaves us. We've defined the difference between a group and a team. It all comes down to mutual accountability. We've looked at the whole menu of teams, from top management to virtual. We wrestled with the necessity of that storming phase and the absolute importance of psychological safety.
And we saw in the Chilean mine that these aren't just, abstract academic theories. They are literal survival mechanisms.
The text concludes with a concept from Adler, Heckscher, and Prusak that I think is a really beautiful place to land. The idea of the collaborative community.
This takes the team concept and really scales it up. It suggests that for modern organizations, and especially in public service, we need to move beyond just doing your job. We need to foster an ethic of contribution.
Ethic of contribution. Unpack that for us.
It means you view your work not just as a transaction, I do this task, you pay me, but as a genuine contribution to a shared purpose. It's the psychological shift from saying, that's not in my job description, to saying, how can I help solve this problem?
It's the difference between playing pickup basketball, where you just want to show off your dribbling skills, and playing on a championship team, where you make the extra pass that allows someone else to score the open shot.
Exactly. And in the public sector, where the opponent is poverty or disease or injustice, we cannot afford to be playing pickup ball. We need that collaborative community. The problems are just too complex for lone heroes.
So here's our challenge to you, the listener. Think about the group you are currently working in. Maybe it's your study group for this very class, PP 54361. Maybe it's your department at work.
And ask yourself, are you just a collection of contributors, politely doing your individual assignments and just hoping the other people on the team don't screw up?
Or have you actually endured enough storming to trust each other? Have you built the psychological safety to let a challenger speak up without everyone getting angry?
Are you a group or are you a team?
It's a tough question, but maybe the answer starts with scheduling a little socialization time. Or, clearing the furniture and having a wrestling match.
I would strongly advise checking with your HR department before the wrestling match, but getting a coffee is probably a safe bet.
Sound legal advice as always. Good luck with the readings, everyone. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Goodbye.